Hi, this is Jurgen Rasmussen. Welcome to the Provocative Hypnosis vlog. I woke up compelled today to make this video after I yesterday watched Dr. Todd Grande's critique of Eckhart Tolle. And I wanted to share my thoughts about that particular critique because I think that the critique that he's offering is important and extends far beyond Eckhart Tolle or Dr. Todd Grande himself. Now, the critique itself is kind of a double edged sword because for anyone who has seen even a glimpse of what Eckhart Tolle is pointing to, anyone who has any experience with meditation or has had some insight in that direction, um, for anyone in that category, it's obvious that Dr. Grande just doesn't get it. He just does not get what Eckhart Tolle is pointing towards. And I also think it's very fair to say, and I'll tell you why in a bit, that the critique is largely a straw man and an attempted character assassination of Eckhart Tolle. So anyone who has had some of those insights or even just likes Eckhart Tolle is going to be likely to see that and to just dismiss the whole thing out of hand. I think that would be a mistake, though, because there are a couple of at least small twin babies surrounded by some very toxic bathwater, and it would be a shame to lose those twin babies with the bathwater. So, on the one hand, given that Dr. Grande has close to 700,000 subscribers on his YouTube channel, it would be a bit tragic if a lot of people automatically took for granted what he said and didn't seek out Eckhart Tolle. That would be a shame. On the other hand, as I said, there are some valid criticisms in there. Although, somewhat ironically, I think that if you're going to go after spiritual teachers, Eckhart Tolle might be one of the spiritual teachers who most of that critique the least applies to. Although a couple of them, I think, are on point. And another reason why I would recommend watching the interview that Todd Grande did as well is because I think that a lot of mental health professionals, psychologists, psychiatrists who haven't meditated or who haven't had a experiential insight into the direction in which Tolle and others are pointing are probably going to be very likely to agree with him. And I'll say this about Todd Grande. He is a licensed mental health counselor. He produces a lot of content on his YouTube channel. A lot of it around personality disorders, narcissism, psychopathy, and there's a lot of stuff around true crime and various true crime cases in terms of who might be guilty or who might not be guilty. It's interesting content, although the videos are often quite short and don't really go into depth. He also talks quite a bit about the five-factor personality model and how it may apply to all these cases that he's evaluating. Now, I'll give Todd Grande this. He's a learned guy. He's clearly intelligent, bright, and he reasons well. He usually has the capacity to reason quite well. Although that ability seems to fail him quite a bit in this particular video, which might, say something about us human beings that even if we ordinarily reason well, we can very often lose it when we get emotional or when something conflicts with strongly beliefs that we have. It also points to something else, and that is that a intelligent person who reasons well and tries to understand what Tolle and others are pointing towards, merely using logic, reason, and their intellect, are likely to just not get it at all. So let's look at this a little bit. So Eckhart Tolle had what you could call an awakening or a realization of sorts when he was 29 years old. He was very anxious, suicidally depressed, and at night, one night, not long after his 29th birthday, he was suicidally depressed in bed, and this thought appeared, I can't live with myself anymore. Can't live with myself anymore. And in that moment, he had something of an epiphany of going, wait a minute, if there's an I that can't live with myself anymore, might it be that one of these are real and the other one isn't? And I kind of stopped him in his tracks, and he had this experience of kind of falling into a void with everything dissolving. Uh, and then when he awoke the next morning, he awoke with this very quiet mind, where everything was just brimming with a natural peace and a natural joy of being alive. Now, uh, when Grande criticizes this, he kind of scoffs at it and says, whatever that means, and accuses Tolle of just being nonsensical and vague and not really saying anything of importance. And when Tolle says that like one of the most important things that you can do or realize is to unhook awareness from thinking, Grande again just kind of scoffs at this as if it's nonsensical. It might seem that way from a purely logical perspective, but from an experiential perspective, I have to say, based upon having seen clients professionally for over 20 years, that unhooking thinking from awareness is more or less the bullseye. If you can help someone have a just a glimpse of that realization, it can very often be profoundly life changing. So, what is meant by this is, of course, that the human nature, pretty much, is us just being lost in thought. And there's an identification with these thoughts, so that it seems as if whatever the thinking process kind of dreams up, that seems to be us. We seem to be fused and identified with this continuous narrative of self referential thinking. So it seems as if we are whatever we think. And as a result of that, we try to control our thinking and change our thinking. And a lot of our lives get spent in this competitive, comparative, what do people think about me? How do I come across? So much of our energy is spent trying to defend or to enhance a particular identity or self that it seems as if we are. What happened with Tolle and what happens with some people just by fluke and to others as a result of meditation is that suddenly it's seen that, wait a minute, this really is a collection of thoughts appearing and disappearing in awareness. So let's say that the thought appears that, I'm not worthy. If awareness and thinking is completely fused, it looks as if I am this unworthy character. But if there's a realization that this is a temporary thought that thinks itself, that's arising and disappearing in the open space of awareness, it no longer looks like who you are. It just looks like another event, another sensory experience. The I'm not worthy thought appears and disappears, and then As the thought dissolves, you or beingness itself remains, right? So let me give you a analogy of how awakening might look and or the progression of it, so to speak. And Grande is making a mistake here too, because he talks about beliefs that Tolle is wanting us to believe or to sell us certain beliefs, but he's not really. He's pointing you towards an experiential realization that you can have, a perceptual shift of sorts. So let's take in the tradition of Ramana Maharshi, let's use a movie character analogy. Right? So let's say that there is a dream or there is a movie. You know, if if I'm lost in the dream, it seems as if I am the character in the dream, and that everything revolves around this character. Right? This is our typical egoic consciousness that most of us live with, like goldfish, uh, essentially. But if thinking and awareness kind of unhooks, suddenly you're able to see that, wait a minute, the character itself is made of thoughts and feelings and sensations and is arising and dissolving. So suddenly you're no longer the character, you're the self-aware screen that the character kind of, emerges and dissolves on, essentially, right? So further, but after that though, there can be a deeper realization where it's realized that, wait a minute, I'm the screen on which the character appears, but I'm also the nothingness, that which exists before form, pure consciousness, the energy of life, call it what you will. I am that, and I am the character, and I am everything that kind of arises as one thing, right? So it's this realization that the whole world, so to speak, arises in you and as you, but there's simultaneously not really a you there, right? So seeing this to various degrees, of course, makes what we think seem way less important and way more impersonal. So our sense of suffering has a tendency to dramatically reduce. And when that activity slows down, we kind of fall back into that stillness, that just being that we fundamentally are, and that's inherently peaceful. So there's tremendous value in that, and it doesn't necessarily, but it can lead to a more compassionate life in recognizing that we are all waves in the same ocean. We're all fundamentally the ocean, meaning we share the same being. So maturing a spiritual practice then really becomes about living from that realization. To what extent can one live um, from that realization? So some of the things that Tolle says seems kind of wacky and new agey if you approach it from a purely conceptual logical frame. So for example, one of the things that Grande makes fun of is, Tolle says the secret of life is to die before you die so that you can realize that there is no death. Now, Grande scoffs at this, right, and says, this is like saying the secret, of life is to drive the store before you drive to the store so that you can realize that there is no store and that there is no car, right? He's right. It sounds kind of crazy. But what Toll is pointing to, though, is that for most of us, it seems as if there's this permanent, stable self in here that's separate from the world out there, usually located in here behind the eyes or in the body, which has a past, is in the now, and is moving into the future. This is a perceptual illusion. So, through the practice of meditation, for example, can be seen that this sense of self is an activity that arises and dissolves. It's a combination of mental images and self talk and body sensations and emotions that kind of tangle together and thereby gives the impression of this stable, permanent thing like self. It's possible for some folks through damn sheer luck, and for others of us through a lot of meditation, to get enough concentration, power, and sensory clarity that we're able to suddenly see that, oh shit, this thing like self is actually a selfing process that arises and dissolves. So that sense of an I then comes alive and dies. Comes alive and dies. Moment by moment by moment by moment. That's what he's pointing to. And if you have an experiential sense of that, you suddenly see that it's Grande's car analogy that begins to sound a bit batty and a bit nuts. Now, he also critiques some of the other things that Tolle says when Tolle says that there are no mistakes in the universe and that we're not in control. And this sounds nuts, from a logical, reason-based perspective. But if you have a glimpse, and there's no eye that has that glimpse either, right? So if you have a glimpse that the sense of self is something that arises and dissolves moment by moment, just like everything else arises and dissolves moment by moment, um, you begin to see that the selfing process is a process of claiming. It's something that comes online after a perceptual experience to say, I did that, I created that, I'm in charge of that, right? But it's an ad hoc entity. It's an after the fact ad hoc entity. So if that's seen, it's seen that there is no one there to be in control. There is no one there to call the shots or to be captain of the ship. That there is no I separate from that which emerges. So another thing that Tolle says that Grande kind of scoffs at and makes fun of is Tolle says something to the extent of, go into nature and look at a tree and have the tree teach you about stillness. And, Grande kind of scoffs at this again, and he also scoffs at Tolle saying, you don't have a life, you are life, you know, and Grande has a wry sense of humor. He says it's probably not the first time that Tolle has heard that he doesn't have a life. But here's the point. You can use this analogy with a tree. That the way we use language, we say, okay, the tree um, needs water, needs sunlight, need oxygen to live and to grow, right? And it's not that it's wrong. It's useful. It's practical, for scientific purposes. But it's kind of language created. It makes it seem as if there's this separate entity called the tree. But what you could say is that it all arises as one thing. Like there is no tree separate from the oxygen or the soil or the sunlight or the rain. So it's not that the tree needs those things. The tree is all those things. It all emerges as one thing. So the same thing then goes with a individual or a self, right? That there really is no, if you use the ocean and wave analogy that meditation teachers sometimes use, you know, the individual waves in the ocean are not separate from the ocean. They're fundamentally all ocean, right? So there is no Todd Grande or Ekhart Tolle separate from to have a life. They're two waves in the exact same ocean sharing the same being. So that's a couple of ideas of how Grande in many ways misses the plot. Let's see here what I have. But before we get to some of the points he has that I think are valid, um, well, there's this weird double standard that Grande has here, where he critiques Tolle for not being original or for not having any original ideas, but Tolle isn't really claiming to be original, right? I haven't made him hear those claims. Matter of fact, Tolle is saying that a spiritual teacher doesn't really teach you anything original. He or she can only help you to kind of discover or see through the illusions that keep you from having this realization. Uh, and when I've listened to Grande's videos in the past where he critiques and talks about various forms of psychotherapy, I don't really see this demand to be original uh, be demanded of anyone else. So for example, if you look at CBT, um, cognitive behavioral therapy, like so much of that was already around with Stoicism, with Greek and Roman philosophers, and with Buddhism. He doesn't, at least that I've heard, he doesn't go after CBT people or people like Albert Ellis or ABT, for that. Although Albert Ellis, it should be noted, is very good at giving credit to previous sources. Or take the current wonder child in the world of psychology, ACTS, acceptance and commitment therapy. If you read some of the work by Stephen Hayes, this is, as far as I've understood, the method or the framework that has the most scientific basis at the moment. But take a look at the techniques that go into their so-called diffusing stage. Can you spell neurolinguistic programming? Like, if you have any experience with NLP, you'll see that the stuff that Hayes writes about is the stuff that Richard Bandler and John Grinder wrote about for 30 and 40 years ago. It gives zero credit in that direction. And if you can see the stuff that ACT writes about too, that kind of comes down to unhooking awareness from thinking and developing like a witnessing self. There's very little mention, as far as I can see, to various meditation traditions and Buddhism and stuff like that. So it seems to be a bit of a double standard. Something else too, Grande. I often disagree with him, but he's a bright guy and he reasons quite well. And he's quite good at kind of dissecting where other people make various, cognitive thinking errors. But if you look at this kind of hit piece against Tolle, he's widely projecting and attributing to Tolle the worst of motives, and essentially more than implies that all Tolle really cares about is money, and that he's utterly incompetent, doesn't know anything about philosophy, and Grande offers no evidence, no evidence for this, no goodwill. He doesn't seem to offer any of the uncertainty that he, in the exact same video, uh, puts forward as a virtue, as in going, I don't quite know what Tully's thinking, but for me, it might look like this based upon that, that, and that. Like there's really nothing of that. So that is kind of humorous. Um, let's see here. Yeah, and also there's some academic snobbery there, where he accuses Tolle of not being an academic, not having any academic appreciation. There's kind of an implied, the only people who have the right to speak or the right to valid opinion or who can really know anything of value is people within his own tribe of academics. So some academics might believe that. Many of them don't. I think that's kind of a ridiculous claim. Um, all right. So, how about what he's right about? Right about according to me, I should say. So there is, as I said, a couple of twins in the little bit toxic bathwater here in terms of his critique regarding Tolle. All I have to say again, Tolle is not the best source of the critique, but it does apply to some extent. So when he says that Tolle claims to have the solution to world peace, he's right about that, and I think that's extremely naive. You know, this idea that if we could all just unhook from egoic consciousness and take our stand as consciousness or life itself, uh, that would in and of itself necessarily result in world peace or the solution to all of life's challenges. A lot of spiritual teachers seem to proclaim this. Tolle also, in the speeches and the books I read, seem to kind of more than imply this. I think this is a very shaky claim. And you like the world does not suffer a shortage of meditation masters and people who have had these sorts of insights who can be extremely narcissistic, conceited, even on some occasions psychopathic. If you have some experience with meditation, you might know. So, for example, if we look at the cluster B kind of personality disorders, um, people can achieve uh, late stage realizations. Have the sorts of realizations that Tolle is pointing to, and it may still be made sense out of through a very narcissistic or even psychopathic lens. So there's something else here too. So someone might have the sorts of realizations that Tolle is pointing towards, but it won't necessarily result in them acting in wise, mature, or psychologically astute, or even compassionate ways in the world. Sorry to break that news, but it's not necessarily the case. So, moral and ethical development, for example, or psychological maturity, there's a lot of people out there who have strong ethical compasses, they're psychologically developed, they have their shit together, and they have zero insights in the direction that we're talking about here. There are also other people who have had, awakening realizations or people who have had a lot of meditation training and insights who are not necessarily mature psychologically or who necessarily have an ethical compass at all. So, for example, let's say someone has personality tendencies that are psychopathic strongly, they can still have this sort of insight, but they may not necessarily have the capacity or the inclination really for compassion. Uh, so this is kind of a this is kind of a myth. And one other thing you can also do to kind of dispel the myth is, if you've ever been part of a non-dual online community, or uh, spend some time with people who claim to have, you'll see that they can be as vicious, as tribalistic as anyone else. Now, of course, most of them probably haven't had that much realization or insight, but there's no shortage of people who allegedly have, and most likely have, and who can still end up acting like jerks. So let's take the example of like, these sorts of realizations won't necessarily change your basic personality tendencies. They're likely to make you way less neurotic. But but outside of that, look at Ramana Maharshi and Nisargadatta Maharaj. Two very different personalities, right? Despite these sorts of realizations. So Maharaj, according to people who knew him, had quite a temper. Could be very angry, could burst in anger. He chain smoked. He wore leather jackets, and seemed to have no concern with the welfare of animals, or anything like that. Um, so not picking on him, but um, the idea that seeing the type of stuff that Tolle is pointing you towards, that it's necessarily going to mature you or make you more compassionate or more loving, is largely a myth. So this whole world peace thing, yeah, Grande is right in my opinion to make fun of that. Um, What else? What else do we have here? Yes. So Grande says, and I agree with him, that the most, call it correct, or intellectually honest answer to any philosophical question is really, I don't know. So you don't see too much of that from Tolle. You don't see too much of that from Byron Katie, or Sydney Banks, or many of these well-known teachers. There's often a certainty, an extreme certainty in presenting what they're presenting. And spiritual teachers very often go beyond experientially making discoveries about consciousness and thought and stuff like that. And they start to make claims about the nature of reality. So, for example, consciousness, is it the result of information processing in the brain, like a materialist would claim? Or is panpsychism right, that different, call it, animals can have different levels of consciousness? Or might uh, might consciousness be primary and fundamental in the cosmos, and brains being something that consciousness does? um, Meditation, contemplation, looking in this direction, you can do that all your life. It's not going to help you. It's not going to give you insight into those sorts of things. Now, connected to that too, there's an overselling of what unhooking from egoic consciousness will enable you to do. And quite a few people who point in this direction will downplay reason, and present it as if, if the thinking mind can just slow down, the source of everything, or the universe, or pure consciousness itself will speak through you, and come up with the right solution, or the right thing to do, and you can trust that, right? Now, if you don't know anything about mathematics, or electricity, or how to fly a plane, you know falling into that is in all likelihood not going to magically make those things appear. You're still prone to make mistakes. You're still very prone to make mistakes. So this idea that you know, as a result, we often listen to spiritual teachers, uh, perhaps in ways that we shouldn't. Meaning, if someone knows nothing about political ideology, history, economics, geography, psychology, like some people seem to think that just unhooking thinking or egoic uh, thinking from awareness, that kind of replaces having scientific knowledge or having knowledge of the different fields that I just outlined. That is extremely naive, and I think that Grande is right in pointing out that Tolle does not seem to often say "I don't know" or to acknowledge the importance of these various fields. Um, and one trap, but I'm not sure if this applies to Tolle at all. It doesn't seem very guru-ish or cultish to me at all from what I've seen. But sometimes people can get the notion that a particular spiritual teacher is enlightened and therefore pure consciousness is speaking through him or her. So just take whatever that person says as, or just surrender to the universe and let wisdom speak to you. And they might do this as a standalone thing and downplay reason, downplay science. Um, so for example, in I don't know if Tolle has said anything about the current pandemic, but there's no reason to believe that whatever comes out of Tolle's mouth, if anything, on that topic, should be given any more weight than what comes out of anyone else's mouth on that topic, just because he's quote unquote enlightened. So a lot of spiritual teachers downplay reason, the ability to reason, and that is a huge mistake. And also on the whole money thing, and I don't know what Tolle charges. But there is something kind of ironic in quite a few spiritual teachers charging an arm and a leg, like enormous amounts of money to help people kind of realize that happiness and peace and love is innate and is their nature, right? There is something about that's a little bit, just a little bit weird, right? And I would also say that the kinds of realizations that we're pointing to here, anyone who then says, well, that shows us who or what we fundamentally or ultimately are, and it explains the basis of reality and stuff like that. That's kind of adding a lot of belief onto onto a perceptual shift, so to speak. But these shifts can be tremendous, So um, one thing that Tolle says here, it's not the situations, it's our thinking, it's perceptions. And Tolle, or Grande kind of goes, yeah, we have various mental health approaches that kind of help people, but there are levels of seeing this, right? So if you ever read Byron Katie, you know that she had a tremendous insight into seeing that when she believed her thought, she suffered, and when she didn't believe her thoughts, she didn't, right? Or if you look at Sydney Banks, if you're familiar with him, who allegedly one of his two main insights or awakening experiences was at this retreat for couples, and he told his psychologist friend that he was very insecure, and the other guy looked at Sid and said, Sid, you're not insecure, you just think you are, right? And he had this enormous realization that his whole experience was made of thoughts. You know, he obviously heard something much deeper than what the psychologist realized. But it's possible to really realize the nature of thought at a level way more profound and deep than is common in the typical CBT or EBT systems of psychotherapy that Grande sometimes refers to. So, anyways, I hope these musings were useful. I hope you check out Tolle. He's helped a shitload of people. Also, check out Todd Grande. He has some interesting videos. Check out this particular interview that he did. I'd love to hear your comments, whether you agree with me or you don't agree with me. Uh, Anyways, if you're looking, if my ideas resonate with you and you're looking to make some sort of change in your life, or if you're looking for mentoring, you can reach me at provocativehypnosis.com. Till next time.